Hey everyone. So I'm trying to figure out how to say this because I don't want to come off as though I'm trying to pull energy away from a topic that is very important. And I'm also not trying to in any way obfuscate the primary people that this affects. So it's obvious that I'm probably going to be talking about, you know, the Roe v. Wade repeal and the effects of that. The thing that I want to bring up is that I think that there is a way in which this conversation is happening on the online left that is concerning. And not concerning in the sense that I think it's the end of the world, but I do feel like the way this is talked about does create some problems. Let me explain. So it's very easy out the gate for a lib to say, okay, the Roe v. Wade repeal affects women. But in reality, we all know that this also affects AFAB, NBs, and trans masks and trans men, right? If you are AFAB and your gender identity is anything in the spectrum, spoiler alert, you're going to have a bad day if you get pregnant and you're in a red state, right?
Yep.
Now, we all know why that happens, why the effects of this stuff on trans men and NBs and other people and other gender nonconforming people is such a problem, because there's an essentialization of the way gender and sex are thought about in this country. We essentialize certain organs in the body to be the end-all be-all of what gender is, or at least that's what the average normie thinks. Add in the fact that we associate certain things, such as, for example, having children, as being primarily a feminine thing. Thank you, Bun. And you start to get into this place where you start to notice that gender for some of these people is this metaphysical concept. It's not something that's an identity or something that the person experiences. It's that because gender and sex are irreparably essentially connected, there's almost like a spirituality to the way people talk about this stuff. So you're not a woman because you identify as a woman. You're a woman because you have this energy or soul or the essence of a woman. This is why often when we talk about passing, there's a lot of people that think about this as a form of like tricking, right? Because you're somehow defying people's perceptions against what your essential essence is. Hell, even older transsexuals used to define this as, you know, I just was born with a woman's soul. I just knew since I was a very young girl that I was a girl, and I would steal my mom's high-heeled shoes. The problem is that this line of thinking essentializes it in such a way as to open the door for transmedicalism. We know this. Right? This is the shit that Buck Angel sells. That no way at all are you ever truly a woman if you're a trans woman. No way are you truly ever a man if you're a trans man, because that's Buck's shame loop that he's been stuck in for the better part of 30 plus years. Tranpa, as he likes to be called, can't seem to get his head out of his ass. And the problem is that a lot of times this idea that you're not actually your identity, it really does ring as just projection. But it does betray this essentialization, this metaphysical way of thinking of gender. Now, why am I bringing this up? Clearly, this is going to hurt AFAB people of all stripes. This is going to be bad. Real bad. Bad, 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 bad. There's been some hope. Talk about that later. But shit's going to get worse. There's a lot of court cases coming up, and we may see a lot of our rights go away, and we may see queer people under attack in a way that we have not seen in decades. Right? I am very much of the opinion that we are moving more and more towards a fascistic, theocratic state, a Christo-fascist nation that will very clearly try to rig the system so we no longer have the chance of an actual real president, but rather just continuing god emperors of Trump or whatever, whoever the current flavor of insanity is. Especially with one of the court cases coming up, this stuff is scary. But just looking at Roe v. Wade, there's a group that I think is affected by this that I don't think people are thinking about. And I want to bring this up. I think the discourse around Roe v. Wade unintentionally harms trans women. I'm not saying that to the exclusion of cis women, trans men, or non-binary people. What I'm saying is that I think there's an unintended side effect in this discussion. In the same way that like non-binary people and trans men are erased in that discussion by libs and by leftists who don't think before they send out a tweet. In the same way, this sort of essentialization of femininity basically lays out that what it makes a woman, especially when we talk about, you know, specifically abortion, is the having of a uterus. All of a sudden, trans women don't quite add up to that because our bodies are different. Right? Our bodies exist differently. And so the problem is that, does that mean we're any less women? Well, no, that's not how gender works. That would be like saying a woman who had a hysterectomy is less of a woman. And while there are people who would make that argument, I don't think any real leftist, or to be fair, any real feminist would make that argument. That's stupid. I think there's a way that this discourse has been going on for a while that does stand out to me as really strange. It seems to hurt trans femmes in this way of, we're sort of silenced because we're not really supposed to speak up about this issue. We can talk about remembering trans men, remembering non-binary people, but what if you're a trans woman and you have a cis woman as a partner and you're a trans man? What is it like for you to watch the fear in your partner's eyes that if something just happens to go wrong during sex and you haven't had bottom surgery, guess what? That's suddenly a hell you're in, right? What if you have two NBs that get together, one of them's AMAB, one of them's AFAB, and that's a possibility. If one of those people is non-binary but trans femme, you have to watch that now unfold. Not to mention the fact that you'll see everybody sort of misgender your partner because of this essentialized experience that is supposedly only experienced by women. And not only does that invalidate that non-binary person's gender by essentially making her feminine, but it also has the unintended side effect of now completely erasing yours as well. Because you don't have that capability. Ignoring the fact that we actually have science right now working towards that we can actually talk about transplanting uteruses into trans women. There's a scientist in Britain right now that's working on trying to do this and actually like have a child come to term, which would be based. But again, this stuff is really complex. And I'm not saying this to the exclusion of cis women, trans men, or non-binary people. I just want it to be clear that the repeal of Roe v. Wade hurts everyone.
Well, and especially because there are a lot of areas where we still need a lot of research to understand, you know, people's bodies, be that cis women or trans women or non-binary, trans men, everyone across the board, right? I think for me, especially when I think about this, repealing this is going to make it harder for a lot of that research to happen and answer a lot of those questions that we still have, and does frame things in a really weird way, you know, and really cut people off, I think, from care that they might need, or us from, you know, experimenting with different treatments that might be really helpful to people, right? In terms of like PMDD, I've been trying microdosing testosterone. I find that super, super helpful, right? And that's very untraditional. But if you are, you know, a trans woman and dealing with basically period symptoms, okay, you know, a lot of what we tend to do for that is birth control. But how does, you know, birth control, how does that work for trans women? Well, guess what? A lot of this shit in Roe v. Wade is fucking that too. And so that's where, like, there's so many different levels and so many different ways that the trickle down from this is just going to hurt everyone.
Well, and also you bring up a good point about periods. Is this is something we've run into with your PMDD and doctors, is that same essentialization around pregnancy is also the same essentialization that happens around periods.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That you know, it's like, it's almost like this head pat thing where it's like, oh, you're non-binary, but seriously, you're a woman.
Yeah, yeah.
It really does have that fucking energy. Like, oh well, yeah, they're gonna put them.
Yeah, and they're gonna put like me having a uterus first, rather than like me as Zena going, no, these are my actual needs and wants right now. Right.
A big factor of that, if I remember correctly, was when we were originally trying to figure out ways to deal with the PMDD. One of Zena's ideas was actually to get either what was it, tubal ligation or or hysterectomy. There was a couple ideas. And
removal of the ovaries is the way to go with PMDD, but that's an involved process.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And so basically the premise of this is that Zena was asking about this, and every doctor we talked to would basically just blow them off. And the reason being is there seems to be almost this like mental block doctors have, at least the doctors we ran into, where the idea of taking out quote unquote healthy functional organs out of an AFAB person really seems to weird them out. Mm-hmm. They don't mind doing top surgeries, I assume, because the idea is if that person ever has children, they can use formula and stuff, although today, but not so much. But the idea that you have to protect AFAB fertility is really weird.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And it goes into this same thing because we don't put in as much effort into protecting AMAB fertility either. And we also don't the period thing is really interesting too, because it does create a form of gatekeeping. Like there are people that will still argue, despite anecdotal evidence, that trans women are experiencing something. They still may experience those muscular contractions. Their body still may work in a particular way. Do they have some of those organs? No, but some of the stuff doesn't take place in those organs.
Or the emotional ups and downs, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the emotional stuff that comes with PMS. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the problem is with this whole discussion is that there's a way in which continued cis sexism and cis normativity continues to sort of obfuscate these problems, and not just to the exclusion of trans men and non-binary people, though they are the most affected, because by having those parts, they get sort of essentialized back into a state that doesn't really acknowledge their gender or who they are, because we have irreverently tied the idea of mother to these parts or father to these parts, when that's really not those. One of those is a social role. The other one is just biology, right? Those two things have nothing connected.
You physically have these parts observably within you, right? Like that's the other one in there.
Yeah. You have these parts, and so we gave you this name as this role, right? When you have kids, this is what you are, but that's not true anymore necessarily. So I guess my overall point with this is that I worry that there is going to be unforeseen side effects and damages because of Roe v. Wade. And this is not there's the obvious stuff that's more important. There's the effects on poor people of color, the effects on, gender affirming care for pregnant people. That stuff all comes first. But I just want people to consider this idea. Excuse me. I want people to consider this idea that it may very well be possible that the way we talk about this may be disincluding trans women in a way that I don't know if is necessary. And I don't know exactly how to fix that. And I do agree in principle that we should be standing with women, trans men, NBs, and anyone else who's AFAB in regards to, protecting abortion rights, protecting choice, protecting contraception. All of these things, in my humble opinion, are important. And I know for Zena as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I just want to consider the idea that in the way we talk about this, are we not potentially cutting out trans women in a way where we're sort of reifying those sort of cis sexist ideals? So just something to consider. Yeah,
I think so. When I think of abortion rights, especially, and birth control, I do think that this affects everybody and not just people with AFAB bodies. It does. It changes how people in relationships are. It changes what kind of access both of the people in a coupleship have, or a multi-person partnership. It affects everyone. Okay, if you are a cis male person, you are also affected. What contraception is easy for your partner to get also affects you. And so that's, of course, the other part here is that a lot of these conversations just erase the responsibility that, people with a penis and the ability to, cause a pregnancy also have in this. That's not great either. Thank you. And so I think I would love to see the conversation more kind of geared towards finding a way to actually take everyone into account, because this really is something that we are all affected by. Granted, from an activist standpoint, I do know that this stuff is really emotional for people, and for some people, the knowledge that they have is what they have at the moment. And so if I am talking with them, I tend to gear what I'm saying towards where they're at, right? It may be a lot for somebody to hold on to learning about abortion and then also trying to learn some intense queer theory. But for other parts of us, especially even following the channel for a while, you're probably pretty familiar with queer theory and a lot of the concepts we're talking about. So you may need to be like, wait, how do I make sense of this? How do I think of the world right now? I do really like how Mama Dr. Jones talks about this stuff in her videos. She makes sure to use inclusive language, and language that isn't like gendered. That way she makes sure that she covers everybody, because she knows that she could be seeing a range of people in her practice. And that gender identities are not the same as what physical parts you may have available in a situation. So I do think it's important to consider the way we talk about this.
Yeah. And the other thing I was going to say is just as like a final thought, Zena kind of brought this up in my head, is I know there's only so much time in the day, but I think that there's a way in which like we need to make some space for trans femmes to be able to talk about the effects of this. Because if you're a trans femme who has a genuine desire to have children, the way in which that affects you, to know that not only do you have this desire, but that in some ways it can't really be met in any kind of direct way. But now your sisters who are cis, or your brothers or your NB siblings who can get pregnant, now that choice is taken away from them.
Yeah.
These are two kinds of grief. And while I still think that the ones that the AFAB people are experiencing in a way is more important because it has a much more real direct political effect, I do think giving trans femmes the ability to talk about that grief of not only seeing what's happening to their sisters and their brothers and their NB siblings, but also really attempting to give space for the fact that like this is not something that you really can have. Like, the choice is taken away from both sides. It's just the choice is different. The choice is whether or not to have a pregnancy. The choice is taken away is, can you even get pregnant? We didn't ask to be born AMAB, right? So just some stuff to consider. I think that's all I've got on this one.
Yeah, no, I think that's about everything. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll call this here. Cut the segment. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.